So today in history we're going to be comparing a modern school to those in the Victorian age. Going to school in Victorian times was very different to school life today. In England, schools were not free until 1891. Until then, children had to pay to go to school. This would have meant that families, even if they wanted to, wouldn't have been able to afford to send their child to school. Poor children were able to go to some free schools or charity schools run by women called dame schools. They also were able to go to Sunday schools run by church. Children from rich families were often educated at home until they were 10 years old. Boys were sent to public schools like Eton or Harrow. However, very few schools had availability for girls. Rich girls were usually educated at home. The children at home would have been taught by a governor or governess. A governor if it was a man, a governess if it was a lady. Queen Victoria made many changes to schools to improve education, especially for the poor children. During Queen Victoria's reign, it was eventually decided by the government that all children should go to school and check that schools were giving the best education. Even when this was eventually made into a law, lots of poorer families kept their children at home because they simply could not afford for their child to go to school because they needed the money that the child would earn in order to help support the rest of the family. Laws were also introduced to decide what children should and should not be expected to do, such as work. This is to do with the jobs that you learnt about last week, not just about schoolwork. The classroom in Victorian times was sometimes known as the schoolroom. In the schoolroom, pupils sat at desks in rows facing the front, a bit like our classrooms have had to be set up due to the coronavirus. The windows of the schoolroom were high so that pupils could not look out, and the rooms would have been lit by gas lights. It was probably a cold room, so you'd have wanted to sit close to the fire. Obviously, they had no central heating, so they would have had coal fires in the rooms to warm them. The walls would have been quite bare, but there would have been a large map on the wall for you to look at. The school morning started at 9 and lasted until 12. Children were sent home for lunch and then returned for afternoon classes, which ran from 2 until 5. There were no school lunches. Teachers. There were more male teachers than female teachers in Victorian times. Children were expected to call a male teacher sir and a female teacher madam or miss. In many schools, pupil teachers helped with the teaching. These are boys and girls over 13 years old. After being a pupil teacher for 5 years, they could themselves become a teacher. So for the majority of pupils in the Victorian age, when they would finish primary school, they wouldn't be going to secondary school, they'd be going out to work. Punishment. Pupils in Victorian schools were punished very harshly if they misbehaved. Some reasons for punishments could be for rudeness, leaving a room without permission, not telling the truth, laziness, or missing school. Sometimes teachers used a cane. Canes were made from wood and used to hit children. Boys were usually caned on their backsides and girls were caned across their hands or bare legs. Dunce was a term used to describe someone who found learning difficult. If children were finding the work difficult and struggled to keep up in class, they were often made to wear a dunce's cap. A dunce's cap was usually made out of newspaper with the word dunce or a big letter D written on it. Children who were made to wear the dunce's cap were sometimes told to stand in front of the class because the teachers believed the child would be embarrassed into making more effort and thus producing better work. Teachers may also have used a tawse, a thick leather strap split at one end into 2 or 3 tails across children's hands or legs. This would have been particularly cruel and painful punishment. In some Victorian classrooms, badly behaved children may be put in a punishment basket, which was a wicker basket raised from the ground by ropes and pulleys. Children could be left suspended from the ceiling for the entire morning. Teachers may have also given the children lines. This meant children would have had to write the same sentence over 100 times without making a single mistake. All punishments were recorded in the school's punishments book. Some of these books are still in existence today, which is how we know so much about what took place in the Victorian classroom. Lessons in Victorian times were mostly made up of the teacher talking and the pupils listening or copying from the board. Creativity and individuality were not encouraged, and the children would have all have produced exactly identical pieces of work. Learning was done by rote, which means children chanted things over and over again, like the multiplication times table facts, until they knew them by heart. Children studied the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic, maths. Pupils would also have studied history and geography. Girls and boys often had different activities to do in the afternoon. The girls were taught cooking or sewing, and the boys might have been taught woodwork. In Victorian times, paper was expensive, so pupils used slates instead. A slate is a bit like a sort of chalkboard. Children would scratch letters or numbers onto the slate with a sharp slate pencil. The slates could be cleaned easily and could be used again. When you would have finished your work, it would have been read and then simply wiped away. Young children could practice writing their letters in sand. We still use this today sometimes. Older children use fountain pens and ink. Desks had a place for an inkwell, and one of the pupils would have had the job of filling the inkwells. The inkwells would have been made of porcelain or little china bowls. I think we still have a couple of these desks in school somewhere today. Pupils were taught to use cursive writing called copperplate. If you were left-handed, you were often forced to write with your right hand. They would have achieved this by simply tying the child's left hand behind their back and making them write with their right hand. Copperplate is still available as a font in Microsoft Word. What I would like you to do now is to sort information into this Venn diagram. So you've got one hoop for what Victorian schools would have been like, one hoop for what modern schools would have been like, and in the middle would have been things that we have today in our modern schools that would also have been the same in the Victorian schools. So I've put a few things in there to get you started with, and I've also put some suggestions around the outside if you get stuck. Please see if you can get at least 5 things in the Victorian only hoop and the modern only hoop. If you can get 5 in the middle of them both, that will be very impressive. When I say minimum, what that means is I want minimum of 5. If you can think of more than 5, that's brilliant. If you still have time after that, turn to the next page in the booklet. What I would like you to do is research some Victorian age toys. So then you would draw a toy from the Victorian age, and also you're going to draw a toy from the modern age. It's something that they wouldn't have been able to play with in the Victorian age. Underneath, you need to write what it is and how it would have been played with. When you have finished your work, if you could take a photo of it and send it to me via email so I can see it, that will be great. I hope you enjoy the task.